Welcome to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Sloper, the trusted name in real estate radio. Now, here's Ryan Sloper.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with the podcast, my guest and I will cover every angle of real estate under the sun, from interest rates to the economy to what's happening in Washington. Anything that affects our real estate markets will be covered here. It's more than just a real estate show. We're obviously going to talk about the economics behind things. We're going to talk about many of the things that many people don't want to talk about, which is the real numbers, real statistics, cold hard facts that actually matter. Now, many people can turn a blind eye to this, mainly the media. They give us, the information they want to give us, which is just basically that everything is fine. It's always fine. Nothing is ever bad, which we know not to be true. If you guys are tuning in for the first time, I'd like for you to, potentially go to iTunes and subscribe, download, share this show to really help it, get the word out there. If you go to iTunes and search Real Estate 360 in the search bar, you can subscribe and download, share right from there. And also, if you don't have access to iTunes, you can also stream the show at realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. Also on the right-hand side at that website, there's an Ask a Question button where listeners can write in any questions that you may have. Like I said, and if it's in regards to mortgages or interest rates, what's going on in the economy that you're struggling with, to help you make better, educated, more informed decisions. That's what we're here to do. Joining me on our panel, as he does each and every week, is Louis Camerazano. Louis is a former school teacher, a former attorney, and a former general manager of a major real estate portal. He's often cited in the media as a real estate industry expert in Inman News, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fox Business, U.S. News, MSN, and numerous others. Louis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing grand, Ryan. How are you today?
I'm doing well. So, last time we spoke, obviously we talked about many of those same things that we've been talking about the media and all the numbers, the employment numbers that came out and how they were spinning things where the economy is moving in the right direction. We got what they feel, the media that is, as a great economic report, because there was so many more part-time jobs created, but they didn't talk about actually the full-time workers that were falling off. They don't talk about the employed people or the unemployed people that have been on unemployment so long that they're no longer even considered or counted in their statistics. So last week, we had initial weekly jobless claims of 304,000 versus the estimated of 316,000, and the 4-week moving average was down 3,500 to 311,500. So, of course, this is positive economic news to the media, not to you or I, but to them. So mortgage interest rates obviously ticked up a little bit on that news because they don't like positive economic news, or they don't like positive news coming from the media. Let's just put it that way. So I want to kind of get your take, because we also had the Fed coming back out with the Fed minutes saying that they're basically going to end mortgage-backed security and Treasury purchases in October with a final $15 billion purchase, and that's going to basically be the end of QE. Obviously, they're putting finite dates on everything, and it's a continuation of their move to come off of QE. But in reality, they couldn't make this move, Louis, if they knew that there wasn't somebody to pick up the slack or continue to purchase Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, because obviously we would see mortgage interest rates shoot through the roof pretty much overnight. So there has been a master plan in place, which is very apparent to me over the last 4, 5, 6 months, that they are not the only buyer of mortgage-backed securities. Where it was about 78 to 80% of all purchases were coming from them. Since they've stopped buying, there has been Belgium and there's been other people that have been stepping in and buying these. So I want to kind of get your take as to where we're headed into this October. We have earnings season coming up for many of the businesses the second quarter, which is supposed to be very dismal reports. Now, you and I talked in the first quarter. They blamed it on the weather. And I told you that coming into the second quarter, I'd be curious to see where they would go, because you can't go from negative $300,000 first quarter earnings, $300 million, to all of a sudden positive $300 million. It's not going to happen. It's just going to probably be maybe slightly better than it was. So instead of losing $300 million for a big company like Walmart or Target, they might only lose $250 million because the weather was no longer a factor, but now they just didn't lose as much money as they did in the first quarter. Right. So I want to kind of get your take as to where things are going. Where do you think earnings are going to come. What's going to happen when we get to October with this final $15 billion purchase, and do you think it's going to have any effect, or is it going to just be more of the same?
Okay, well, let's take it in order of what you started with the Fed's announcement that they are going to do the taper. And there was an article in Fortune, again with my favorite correspondent over there, Christopher Matthews, and his point was that QE is going to end, but the Federal Reserve is having a great year, and the employment numbers have improved, the financial markets are fine, but he says, but QE critics are standing firm. And, of course, I'm one of those QE critics. And I engage in the conversation with him, Ryan, and it's typical of the kind of cognitive dissonance or just denial of reality that many of these reporters have when they cheerlead on the economy and what the Fed has done. I kind of asked him, okay, if the Fed is going to stop buying, then who's going to buy the Treasuries? He's like, I'm not worried about that at all. Europe and China, to name two. There's plenty of demand for U.S. debt. These are quotes in his tweets. And I pointed out that, well, China has, in the last year and a half, if these people would look, has stopped buying U.S. Treasuries. So they've maintained the same amount. They're not buying more. Now, Europe, of course, has bought more, but that was a sudden surge, as we've talked about, where Belgium turned out to be the mystery buyer, but we don't know who that is and why that is. It all seems very convenient. And the other thing that they don't point out, Ryan, is, okay, if they're not worried about demand of Treasuries, that people are going to buy them when the Fed was buying at 60 to 90%, that if all of a sudden they stop, there's not going to be a problem. That questions in why did they have to buy them in the first place? If there's such roaring demand for U.S. Treasuries, such that rates would remain low, they don't ask that question then. It's inconsistent to say that we're not worried that somebody else won't buy them. Well, if you weren't worried about them, then you should be questioning why the Fed was buying them in the first place. So this is what you get from the media. They are going to shrug off any complaints or any type of questions about what the Fed is doing is either conspiracy theory or you don't understand economics, whatever. But in any event, QE is on the way out. They've decided to finish it. They're going to finish it. You and I talked about this. They're gaining their credibility. Now, of course, they can always reverse it if the economic data comes in another way. Now, the economic data that's been coming in has been officially bad. You have, the 2.9% GDP was negative in the first quarter run, right? And everything since then hasn't really been good, but they spun it as to be good. So what they're trying to do, and I call this kind of journalistic or economic twerking, they get out there, they make a big show after all these numbers come out, and they try to spin them into some type of wonderful economic news, such that they've conditioned all of us to think, well, the economy is doing great, so that somehow the economy isn't doing great, it can be viewed as unexpected. Now, there's another kind of insidious thing going on here, Ryan, because the Fed isn't saying the economy is great, the economy is accelerating, the economy is wonderful. They've all been using the term normal. Things are getting back to normal, things are getting back to normal, because they don't want to be on the wrong side of it when they have to finally admit things aren't doing well. But the media is going full force and saying that everything is fine. And here's a classic example, Ron. I want to get your take on this. Now, you had the largest Portuguese bank default on its debt. That's a huge thing. It's a European bank. Portugal is a relatively large country. It's 9-10 million people. It's bigger than Cyprus. And when that was announced that morning, the stock markets took a tumble. By the afternoon, they had recovered. By the next day, the headlines were all talking about Portuguese bank worries fade. And to me, that's like the Titanic passengers are calm now after the initial jolt. Okay, so the people have gotten over their jitters. That's Yahoo, Reuters. But then CNN Money went one step further, which to me is astonishing. They actually put out a story about why Portugal doesn't matter and why you should stay calm about it. And here's their reasons. One, it's a local problem. Now, we know all of these things are not just local. You don't contain them. They all have cascading effects. Two, here's my favorite. Regulators are on the case. Yeah, just like they were with Bernie Madoff, just like they are with gold and silver manipulation. We've seen what regulators do. No one goes to jail. No one gets in trouble. All that might happen is somebody might get fined. Well, if the Portuguese bank is defaulted, Good luck finding them. What comfort is there in that the regulators are on the case? Then they said Europe's getting its act together. I don't know what that means. Europe has gone to negative interest rates because their economy is no good. That's getting their act together. And then they say, well, Portugal's in better shape than it was 2 months ago. Right. So why'd their bank default? But it's astonishing, Ryan, how they put out these stories. And they expect you to say, yeah, nothing to see here. Then right after Portugal that goes under, has that default, the fourth largest bank in Bulgaria announces it's going to collapse. Now, what do they say there? Well, they've known about this, and this is just an issue of fraud. Well, yeah. Well, isn't there fraud in all these banks? Isn't that what the problem is? And maybe this doesn't apply to all the other banks. No, Portugal, small country, don't worry about that. People worry about that for 3 hours, and the stock market goes back up. The Bulgarian bank collapses. Yeah, it's just fraud. Hey, the regulators are on the case there, too. So, Ryan, what you have is you've got poor economic news. You've got visible cracks in the European banking system. Right. You've got, Bank Paribas has been fined $9 billion. I'm sure that's just not, they're just going to shrug that off. That's not a big deal. I saw this morning, I think Citicorp is going to have to pay a $7 or $9 billion fine for some misdeeds that they've done. So if these cracks are so obvious, how are they going to say it was unexpected when you do have some type of meltdown?
Right. Yeah, and, with the ECB, obviously things aren't going very well. The European economy is terrible. They've got, obviously, these fears of deflation going on over there, which has led Mario Draghi to launch a new lending program there to try to boost the economy, right? So they're taking the same steps that we have over here, which then allows us to argue, hey, look, things aren't as bad here as they are over there. Look, we must be moving in the right direction, right? It's always,
and that is the narrative. You're right.
That's the narrative that they stick to. I mean, literally, when that happened in Portugal, the Dow dropped 180 points in 30 minutes, right? You would expect for there to be some sort of continuation of that, but we're able to shrug that off, basically reverse course and only lose about 70 points. And, I mean, that's a major issue.
But do you think, Ryan, that investors shrugged it off, or there was some sovereign fund buying, Fed buying, and then people just joined in? They figured, oh, they got our back. They've told us not to worry. And they buy back in. Do you think investors actually said this is not a big deal?
Right. I really think that, you are right. I think investors know that this is a big deal, but with the Fed and funds and everything else buying out there, it really turns into not a big deal as far as the stock numbers are concerned, right? But that's
and then the stories come out the next day and they tell you, hey, don't worry about it. It's just an iceberg. We hit these things all the time.
Yep.
And the one that hit in the back, that's we knew about, no big deal.
Right, and you brought up Citi. So Citi did ink a $7 billion mortgage settlement. So that's official now. And, I get sick when I read these things, honestly, because I'm just thinking about how much, corrupt and stuff was taking place, the fraud that was taking place with these banks, and they're just allowed to get away with this time after time. J.P. Morgan was basically allowed to get out on a fine. Now Citigroup's getting out on a fine. Bank of America's getting out on a fine.
Where does the money go, Ryan?
It goes right back to the federal government.
Right. Does it go to you? Does it go back to you and me, who presumably the money was stolen from?
Absolutely not. And the only reason that they're paying these fines is because the Justice Department lawyers are notifying the bank that they're going to file a lawsuit. So originally, Citi only wanted to offer up $363 million. Now, isn't it ironic that the Justice Department was seeking $12 billion? That's initially how much they wanted to get from Citi. And what did they end up paying? A little over half of the $12 billion, $7 billion. So basically they said, we won't come after you if you give us a big enough number. Now, take a middle-class American if they were to do something fraudulent, right? They would not only be put in prison, they would be forced to pay penalties on top of that.
Brian, a fraud, it's de facto. A number that big means you must have done something so criminal that you had to pay $12 billion, but there's no criminal charges.
Exactly, because money is bigger than anything else in this country. And
right, when you get a parking ticket, right, you get a $50 parking ticket. That's evidence that you really didn't do anything criminal. You parked where you shouldn't. It's $50.
Right.
But if somehow I heard that Ryan Sloper got a $40 million fine, I would think you're going to jail.
Well, I'm going to jail.
That's just the fine. You must have done something.
And you better run far away from me as far as business is concerned. right?
Absolutely.
But
you bank with a company that has to pay a $12 billion fine. You feel comfortable that your money's safe there because they do everything correctly?
But guess
that they don't commit fraud?
Right. Guess what the narrative is? Everybody was doing it, right? Everybody was doing it, so it's okay. And guess what?
Yeah. That's 6-year-old logic.
Right.
Joe took a cookie. I'm okay because I took one too.
Yeah, and in all honesty, it's just sick. I mean, this continues to happen. They're going to pay their fines. They've made probably hundreds of billions of dollars. They pay their $7 billion fine, and they just move on with life. They can continue to make bad bets. They can continue to do the same things, pay their fines, but they're still making profits on the other side.
Crime pays, right, Ryan?
Absolutely. And you know,
cost of doing business.
It is, and unfortunately, that's where we're at as a country right now, that we can continue to let the rich get away with basically, you know, highway robbery here. I mean, this is just it's unheard of. But
hey, have you seen the Gallup poll that came out the other day on, and this is a direct indictment on all these inflation nonsense statistics, on what people are spending money on? They're spending more on groceries, gas, healthcare, utilities, and they're spending less on stuff like the things they want to spend on, like clothing, consumer electronics, traveling, dining out. Well, that tells you right there. The consumer is strapped. There's inflation in things that they have to buy, and they don't have money left over to buy the stuff they want.
Absolutely. And you know,
but where's the recovery?
There is.
Why does the media keep telling us this is wonderful? When the data tells you that consumers would love to buy vacations. They would love to go, buy more clothes and consumer electronics. Not that they don't want these things.
But guess what, Louis? Remember you and I talked, I believe it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Credit card companies are issuing more new credit than in many years in the past. So how can people afford to buy clothing? How can they afford to go on vacations? Well, they just put themselves into debt. That's how you do it. And
that's a recovery. And Janet Yellen has the nerve to call the inflation numbers recently noise. Yeah, bring the noise, woman. I mean, what is she talking about? When they go up every month and the data shows that people can't afford stuff that they want to buy and they have to pay more for stuff that they have to buy, that's noise.
Right. Yeah, and you know what? I always talk about doing the eye test, and Louis, one of the things that people tell me all the time now is that they're more concerned about like what their mortgage payment would be because of the things that you listed, the rising, energy prices, gas prices, groceries.
Can't avoid them.
You cannot get away from those, and everybody's feeling it when they go to the supermarket and they look and they can't get out of there for less than $100, and you got like a bag or two to show for it, right?
Hey, you know what else, Ryan? When I was in the grocery store the other day, and I've been reading all these reports. I don't really pay that much attention. I just look at the price, and I always look at the ounces, and so I don't go by. I don't just grab something off the shelf. I check the cost per ounce and so on. But the guy picked up the thing, and I overheard him, and he said it for my benefit. He goes, "This package is a lot smaller. It used to be a 12-ounce package of chips, and it was 8 ounces." And that's what they're doing, and it's obvious to people. You can't trick them, that there's no inflation.
Well, not just that, Louis, right? I mean, it's the whole thing with potato chips, right? You can make a bigger bag and put less chips in it, but it looks like there's more in there, right?
Or you can make a smaller bag and charge the same price, and people think you don't notice.
Right.
So I know they've done it with the bacon packages. They're not a pound. They're 12 ounces. The soda goes from 64 ounces to 57 and a half.
Yeah, because just imagine if literally, like, people...
Noise.
It's just noise. People, if you were, like, doing it and really people having a hard time distinguish whether something they're really losing, a couple ounces in a package, then there would be an uproar happening. But they don't, the simple, part of the equation is that these businesses can't operate unless they cut their costs, right?
Right.
And you brought up a great point. How is GDP going to get better when people have less disposable income month after month after month after month?
70% of GDP, 67, whatever it is, very close to 70%, is consumer spending. That's a flaw in the economy to begin with, but if they're not spending... And, I saw a thing in Market Watch. Again, here's another type of cheerleading. Here's what it said. The economy's, is doing great and is poised for recovery other than the consumer's not spending. Yeah, we'd have a recovery unless we didn't have a recovery. And what kind of nonsense is that? That we're poised for recovery, except the consumer's not spending. Well, there's a reason the consumer's not spending. They don't have jobs. They have part-time jobs, and they can't afford the higher prices. But that's what they say. And you and I talked about at the beginning of the show, before we came on, about Market Watch, again, putting out, today is President Obama's 2000th day in office. The stock market's up 142%. Evidence of a recovery.
Yeah.
And they're putting out stuff that's unbelievable to begin with, and then the stuff they put out that's factual, to the average person, it falls on deaf ears. So like, okay, so I don't have a job or I have a part-time job. I can't afford things I want, but the stock market's up. So, everything's fine. And not to worry about that Bulgarian bank, and don't worry about Portugal. That's far away. Don't worry about anything.
Right. Well, one of the primary things that Obama ran on was basically, the inequality that's there, right? Income inequality and everything else. And little does he or anyone else want to admit, the monetary policies that have been put in place by the Fed has suppressed the middle class. They have they're almost trying to wipe them out. Because
seems that way, doesn't it?
It does. It seems like you'd rather just have a poor and a rich, and there is no middle class, because that's where we are heading. Because all of the monetary policies that have been put in place have benefited the rich, the middle class. And you had sent me an article, and I actually saw that article, where the daughter of the Mortgage Bankers Association CEO has lost faith in American home ownership dream, right? So David Stevens, the former head of FHA, who stepped down and is now the CEO of the Mortgage Bankers Association, right? So, and it's actually funny, because I have a friend, Lewis, that's actually friends with this girl, okay? That's why I started laughing when I read it, and I tried to reach out to him because I was going to ask him if I could actually talk to her directly. Because
get her on the show.
I'd love to have her on. But she basically, for the quote, as Bloomberg put it, was, when even the cheerleader in chief for housing can't get a rah-rah out of his daughter, you know this time is different, right? And essentially, she's basically saying that she's watched her family members, cousins, whoever else, basically kind of had a bad situation from the last downturn, that she is scared to enter back into the market. So I want to bring up the question and kind of give us another talking point. So is home ownership still a good thing? Is home ownership still the American dream that it once was? And I think that, to answer that question, obviously we have very interesting times right now with the Fed manipulation of interest rates and everything else. They can't drive the market like they thought they were, even though they'll say that they're doing everything that they possibly can. But
remember that we talked about, they've just given up on talking about housing because they haven't been able to. They're talking about other things now. The labor market's improving. We're getting more inflation. That's a good thing. But they don't talk about how they've managed to boost the housing market anymore.
No, and because, they're only boosting high-end housing, which is where the rich come in, because
they can afford it. Their stock portfolios have gone up, so they go and they buy a house. Everyone else, the price goes up, their wages don't go up, or they've gone down. They can't go out and buy houses. You can reduce the interest rates, lower the credit standards. They still can't afford it.
Right. So for the uber rich that were looking at a $2 million home, let's say 2 years ago, and now it's $2.5 million, does it really matter to them? Absolutely not. They could care less.
Well, either put the money in a European bank and get no money back, or put it in a U.S. bank and get no interest. They got to buy something.
But if we're talking about a middle class or lower middle class person that's looking at the difference between where things were at maybe $225 and now they're $275, does that matter? 100% it matters.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, that $50,000 gap could literally be, the difference between them qualifying and not qualifying anymore.
Correct.
Now, for Sarah Stevens, the daughter, to come out and say that, she basically doesn't have any intentions in buying and she's perfectly okay with renting, I feel like there has been a transition to many of the millennials that don't feel the need to buy.
And what does the media constantly tell us, though? Millennials want to buy. Millennials want to buy. Yeah, but they don't want to buy at these prices. They also want jobs. They also want to be movie stars. It's crazy for them to keep pushing. And they keep saying now that millennials represent pent-up demand. Yeah, so does your unborn child. That doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, her quote was, I watched cousins and other family members go through pretty tough situations in 2008 and 2009. We're almost 5 years. Right, we're almost 5 years removed from then. But I do want to touch on a more important point, which you and I kind of always argue in favor of home ownership. So nobody wants to acknowledge, Congress, the president, the Fed, that we have inflation. You and I both know that we have inflation taking place here, right? And if
by definition we have it by increasing the money supply, and by definition what price inflation is, if you just look at prices and don't read the CPI with hedonics, we know there's price inflation too. Correct.
Correct. So if we stop looking at home ownership as, this investment vehicle, and I almost kind of read into Sarah's her quote as that her cousins and family members probably thought of home ownership as an investment, right?
Wrong way to look at it.
Right, which is the wrong way to look at it. But this is why there is, I think, such a jaded perception by these millennials, is because really it was the family members that probably were getting into stated income loans, getting in above their head, not buying a home for the right reason. Right. If you just take a step back and just say, you know what, if I can buy a house, meaning I have a stable job, I have a down payment, I have the credit, and you can lock yourself into a low fixed rate. Now, granted, there still has to be a secondary test that's done, which is what could I pay for rent right now, right? And what would my actual mortgage payment be? Is there a substantial difference there? Meaning, if you could rent for $2,000, but the cheapest mortgage you could get was $3,000, well, then that probably doesn't make sense. But
Ryan, in most parts of the country, they've done surveys on this. It does make sense, even at today's prices, if you can get it, because rents have gone up with the home prices. So you're not really winning by renting. And if you can get the mortgage, you generally are better off with the tax deduction, mortgage interest deduction to buy.
Absolutely. So I would always argue that if you can, and especially if you can borrow around 4%, right, you're actually just don't worry about if your house ever gained $1 or lost $1, because it's really irrelevant. You're locking in your housing cost for 30 years. Now, granted, your taxes can rise, your insurance can rise, those things can, but unfortunately, we're never going to. It's death and taxes, right? So you're going to pay them regardless. Now, if you're renting, you're not necessarily going to pay them, but you're going to probably have rising rent. And
well, you are paying them indirectly. The landlord's going to pass them on to you.
Correct. But, I was having a conversation with a friend this past weekend, and they were considering, renting their house out or selling their house and moving and renting somewhere else into what they considered a nicer community. And I was like, well, I don't really know if that's the best thing for you to do. Number one, you're already locked into a low fixed rate where you're at. Number two, do you want to potentially have to move every 2-3 years? Right? Because that's the situation. You're taking the gamble that your family is going to be on the run for the next however many years. And that, to me, one of the primary benefits of owning a home is that you do have a community, a sense of community, knowing that your kids are going to have a place to grow up and not feel like, you're packing your bags every 12 to 24 months. Right.
And also you can hang stuff on the walls, you can fix the kitchen. There's things you can do when you own a home that you can't do when you rent.
Absolutely. And, and we stop, really, the media doesn't really focus on these things that you can protect yourself from inflation. These are the real reasons why.
Well, because there is no inflation. That's the reasons to buy a home, they don't want you to buy a home because you're going to protect yourself from inflation, because there is no inflation. They want you to buy a home because there's a housing recovery in swing and home prices are rising, and rising home prices, just like all other rising prices and inflation, are good for the economy. So go out and buy a home because it's going to go up. That's the worst reason to buy a home, to buy it because you think it's going to go up 10% and you might move out next year because you're going to sell it.
Right. Yeah, and the funny thing is that I almost think that it's just only you and I that are sitting here talking, beating a dead horse that, hey, it's important to protect yourself from inflation, right? If you have a way to do it, and you can, we're
in favor of it. We're in favor of it for the right reasons. They're in favor of it for the wrong reasons.
Correct. And in the millennials, that's why I honestly feel, and I'm just reading into her comments and listening to other people, they always, I think, thought, maybe whether there was their parents or their grandparents, they looked at it as an investment first and as a home second, right?
Correct. And that they've seen is a mistake. So they don't want to make that mistake, but it's not a mistake to buy it if it makes economic sense for you. It's a mistake to buy it if you're buying it as a speculative asset. And Ryan, these millennials, they may have already ingrained their thought process. One, they've had the scarring. We talked about this on our show on CBS 3 or 4 years ago when this happened, that this was going to happen, that this would turn them off home ownership because they had a brother or a sister or a father or an uncle, somebody lost their home. That was going to turn them off to it. But then the experience of living at home for years in their 20s changes their entire perspective, and it becomes a cultural shift, not just a one-off event. But it's just like 9/11 set into a course the TSA, the NSA, all those different things, a one-time event, it changes the culture. And I think with millennials, many of them don't even think about buying a home. They don't even think about renting. They think it's normal to live at home. And, there was a time, if your parents bought the home and everybody lived there, where is it written that you have to move out at a certain age? It's just like when we were younger, Ryan, that's just what everyone did, so we did it. You got a job and you're able to pay the rent. You're even able to maybe to pay your way through school. That doesn't exist anymore. So the culture and the mentality is, why would I do that?
Because...
Why would I move out of my home where everything is paid for? Maybe I give my dad or mom a few bucks a week from whatever I make, but this is fine. All my friends are like, they're doing this.
Not just that, I can take all the money I make and put it in my bank, right? Like,
yes, that would be a foolish mistake to put it in the bank, but yes, they can save money.
Right, they'll save money, but, and more importantly, they can stay at home, not pay rent, more than likely, and also have their insurance benefits taken care of for a longer period of time now because through Obamacare, right?
Right, so all these things are culturally leading people, kids, millennials, to stay at home.
And why would they want to create this culture? Honestly, I think that they've had to create this culture, meaning Obama and all his push to do this, because they know that there's not the jobs out there, right?
Dependency culture.
Right, exactly. And we've become so dependent that, honestly, this is what's crushing housing. This is what is really crushing
the economy, Ryan.
The overall economy.
Right.
And I mean, it's sad that now that we have this jaded view of home ownership, because, like I said, I think that it's a great thing. You have to. I think that you honestly just have to just take a step back and just look at it for what it is, and not. It's amazing what honestly, we've only been 5 or 6 years removed from it now. But if you could tell me, Louis, that I could continue to take out mortgages at 4% for however long, for 4, 5, 6 years, and I had the means, like I said, to take out 100 of those mortgages, I would do it.
Right, but Ryan, because they've pushed the idea that home prices have to rise, they've made the home into a speculative investment. They've forced people into thinking about it that way, and because now the cost of entrance is so high, people don't want to do it. They've done the same thing. Home ownership is something that people should strive for, just like people used to strive to own their own businesses. Most people don't want their own business anymore because they know it's a hassle. It's a nuisance. If you have a job, you have steady income, it used to be all your benefits are paid for. So they've made two cornerstones of kind of the American dream where people go out on their own, start their own business, buy their own home. That's the kind of mentality you want in an economy, not one where, maybe I can buy a home and it'll go up. Well, now I'm not going to buy it because the speculative froth is off and I might lose it.
Right.
Then the same with the business. It's too much of a hassle. I don't want to fill out the paperwork. I don't want to pay the taxes. I don't want to have to deal with the employees and all the regulations, so I'm not going to start a business. But when you remove housing and entrepreneurship from the equation, then where do you turn? You turn to the government for your sustenance in one way or another.
Yeah, and that's
either because in housing you're going to get some kind of break, or you're going to get some kind of benefit through the government at work, but you don't look to make it on your own.
Right. But that same article we were referring to on Zero Hedge, which showed obviously on Bloomberg as well, they kind of had the graphs of first-time home buyers from 1984 to 2014. So in 1984, first-time buyer at the share of the market was 37% in 1984. 2014, it's 27%.
Right. We had produced that chart on Small Gold months and months ago about why there was no recovery, because first-time home buyers are not on the market, and new home sales aren't high, and existing home sales are flat. It's not a recovery. There's some price rising on the few homes that are being sold.
Right, and then they go to first-time buyers' affordability index. In 1984 was 64.9. 2014 is 116. So
forget it.
Interest rate. 1984 was 13.9%. 2014 average 4.1%.
Now you would think with that, Ryan, what would happen?
That alone, you would think, right, would be able to drive. But obviously, employment's not there. We go, and I know that this stat right here, unemployment among 24 to 25-year-olds in 1984, it was 7.9%. In 2014, it's 6.9%, which I think is crap. I don't think that that's true at all.
No.
And the reason why it's not true is because, number one, people have fallen off unemployment. Number two, people are going back to school, so they're not going to count those people, right? So
right. What is the overall unemployment rate right now? 6.1%. That's a farce.
It's got to be close. I would say close to probably 18%.
15, 18. I agree with that.
Yeah, it's got to be somewhere in there. It's nearing 20%. And the mortgage payments as share of income. In 1984, it was 28.2%. And in
Reasonable.
2014, it's 14.2%, so it's less than what it was in 84. Well, mainly because of interest rates, that would probably be true, but also probably because that people's health care insurance is more, so they can't really afford more because they're having to pay more in everything else, right? So I would expect for that number to come down. But realistically, all of these things, all these graphs and indexes and everything else is saying that it's a great time to buy, but nobody's doing it.
Because they've created a distortion in the market. But the only reason they make it out to be a great time to buy, it really shouldn't be a great time to buy if there's no jobs, but they've lowered the interest rates. The two are incompatible.
Right.
QE makes it look like everything is fine, you should go out and spend money, but it doesn't. It presupposes that people have money and credit to spend and that there's production in the economy to boost the economy. They kind of artificially try to create it by printing the money, and it doesn't work. Now they're going to say they don't have to print the money anymore, and it's going to work anyway because they found somebody else to print the money, and they won't tell us who it is.
It is true. I mean, they'll, and this has been, obviously, the reason why they've been holding so tight to their narrative is they obviously have this plan, right? There's a plan. They can't lose their credibility by all of a sudden stopping QE. Like if they just stopped it again and said, whoa, looks like we're not moving in the right direction, we're going to have to reverse course. They can't do
where's
that.
the reporter asking the question, who's going to buy these things? And when the answer is Belgium, then say, who in Belgium is buying them? Who? Is it a sovereign? Like, why do all of a sudden did someone in Belgium or a group of people in Belgium decide to buy whatever the Fed wasn't buying?
And not just who, why?
Right?
Why?
And at that price, I mean, they're a good deal or something? you know, what they call interest-free risk to buy U.S. Treasuries? Why wouldn't they put all that money in the stock market? That's the better play.
I was about to say, there's got to be some better places to put your money than in Treasuries, right? There's got to be some better place to put your money than in mortgage-backed securities. I'm sorry, but...
Well, especially those mortgage-backed securities, Ryan, those we know are garbage.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and...
That's why they bought them, to get them off the balance sheets of the banks.
Like I say, we're at 4% levels now. So people ask me, could interest rates go lower? They won't let them really go much lower than 4% because you got to remember, on the flip side of things, the banks are not really making any money on the mortgage market anymore because if the margins are so thin, and Jamie Dimon came out and said the mortgage business is terrible, and the only reason that they're really even in it is because they want to keep their banking customers, right? And so these are the
only reason they have banking customers is because they want to keep their trading operations.
Right.
And be able to say they're a bank and not a casino.
Absolutely. So even though we've got, whoever buying our mortgage-backed securities keeping interest rates low, they're not going to go to like 2%. I know people think, and even if they did go to 2%, it still wouldn't matter. It's not going to, you get a temporary spike in buying, a temporary one, but in all honesty, if people can't buy at 4%, they're probably not going to buy at 2%. And there's adjustable rate mortgages out there right now on 5-year ARMs that you can get at near 3%, right? So people tend to get creative when they can get certain interest rates, and they do it. They say, okay, well, I'll take that 5% or 3% for 5 years, and then it can only go up no more than 1%, so that would put me at 4%. So there's options out there now, but the reality is there's just not enough people that are willing and able to buy.
And that's going to change, Ryan, in the next year, 2, 3, 4, if they keep everything the way it is?
It's definitely not going to change. I mean, things can only really get worse because a byproduct of all this manipulation is that we've become more dependent, right? More dependent on the government to do things. People are people that are in school are just staying in school longer, which I actually think is eroding their skills the longer they stay in school, believe it or not, right? I actually think that, you can learn to a point, but eventually you gotta actually get into the workforce, right?
Right, this is like having the car in neutral and revving the engine, making a lot of noise, making a lot of pollution. You ever have the annoying person who sits in front of your home? You got your window open, and he's got the car idling. He's waiting for somebody. But it's idling for half an hour or an hour. And just making noise, pollution, revs the engine every now and then. It's not going anywhere. And that's kind of what they've done with this QE. They've basically just sitting there making a lot of noise, distorting and polluting the environment, and it's not going anywhere. And then when you complain, they rev it up a little bit again. Well, it doesn't go anywhere.
And the only place that they can point to show that they've had some sort of positive impact with this is the stock market.
Right.
That is the only place that they can point. Right.
And your point, Ryan, is now they're going to start, the whole media's going to jump up and down and say, look what Obama gave us, a rising stock market. Isn't he wonderful?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's going to be the whole election's going to be run on, look where we're at, right? Look where we're at in the stock market.
Right.
Forget
Obamacare, forget Benghazi, forget VA scandals, forget the IRS. We have a stock market that's higher.
Well, they can run on the stock market is higher, and basically you don't want to lose your benefits, right? So people that are afraid.
Remember what happened last time when the stock market went down?
Right. I mean, and that's why I always tell people, really when the vote comes, people are going to vote based upon their situation, which basically means if they're dependent upon handouts or, some people legitimate. Some people legitimate, I will give you that, but the majority of them not, right? The majority.
Well, it's not that they're not. It's that they shouldn't be there because they're able. The economy is not giving them a chance, so they've fallen back on government benefits.
Right. Well, and when they think that it makes better financial sense to collect those benefits versus actually going and getting a job, right?
Well, but that doesn't mean they're not stupid.
Oh, not by any means. But I mean,
most people would if you tell them, you want to sit on your couch, eat Oreo cookies and drink soda, and watch TV and get paid, or do you want to wake up at 7 a.m, drive 30 miles, put a suit on, and get paid the same?
So now, why would those people vote for a Republican the next time around if they think that there's a chance that those benefits would be cut? Right?
Right.
It won't happen.
And why would you vote for a Republican when they're not going to change your situation anyway? They might cut your benefits, but they're not going to cut the regulations, cut the taxes, cut the nonsense, and actually provide an entrepreneurial environment where people can get jobs and jobs are created. Everyone thinks that jobs get created by the government. People think money comes from the government. People think jobs come from the government. I love when they say, well, Obama created jobs. No, he didn't. No politician creates jobs.
Right.
All they can do is they can if they want to hire people. But where does that money come from? It just has to come from the private sector where it's more productive, and you put it into the post office.
Right.
But that's what people are trained in. The problem is, right now, if you're a millennial, I think 50% of them identify themselves as socialist. They don't know what it means. They don't know that it means theft and coercion and centrally planned economy, which has gotten us into the problem in the first place. They blame capitalism because that's what socialists do. They blame capitalism for all the problems. So they're not looking for a change that would help them. They're actually looking for more official socialism that would actually give them what they're looking for. Things like guaranteed income. Well, why can't they do that? The government just prints up the money and gives you the $20,000 a year. Now you don't have to worry as much.
Right.
They don't understand that's not how an economy works. The governments, when you have a full control of an economy like they had in Cuba and Russia, they don't know the price of anything. The government controls the means of production. Nothing gets produced, and no one has anything.
Right.
They could have given people in Russia 10 million rubles, 16 million rubles. Would have increased their living standard. That people don't understand that an economy is based on people doing stuff, producing goods and services. And you want them to produce more goods and services, not buy more stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Because as we talked about, Ryan, demand is infinite. People want everything, and they want more of it. Production and labor are limited.
Yeah,
Those are the things that you have to stimulate.
Well, and we have, obviously, in the next couple of weeks.
Demand.
The next couple of weeks, there's going to be, obviously, earnings out, right? So, and I'm going to make sure that I go through the same thing I did last time, go through all the big companies, and we'll read off what their earnings are, probably negative however much. But I'm expecting them to be better than they were in the first quarter, but still way negative. Are you predicting pretty much the same thing?
Yeah, but then they'll say, look at the improvement. Right. The third quarter is going to be even better. Wait till 2017. You'll really see it take off,
So I obviously, and you had sent me an article in the D.C. metro area where basically it's saying that, sales are way down year over year in the D.C. metro area. And I went on
is that true?
Yeah, so sales are down. And, obviously in the higher end areas, which makes sense, where the rich are, like Arlington, Falls Church, and some of these other areas, prices are way up, right? But the sales are still down compared to where they were last year. I think that's
which wasn't a good year anyway, really.
Which really wasn't a good year, and it allows many of the media to go out there and tout once again. Or look at home prices, and okay, great. Housing prices going up by whatever, it's not necessarily a good thing when the demand is not there, because this can reverse course really quick, right? And as more inventory comes to the market and sales slow up even more, it immediately puts pressure on home prices. And I'm actually seeing in many of the areas of surrounding counties in Northern Virginia that it is turning into a buyer's market for sure. Mm-hmm. It's and so this is kind of where it starts, where people are giving seller concessions on all these on almost every deal. Then all of a sudden it's going to turn into reducing prices and also seller concessions. So It's definitely shifted, and it's because there's more properties. They can still say that there's not near as many properties coming on the market, and a lot of that still has to do with people are still underwater. I mean, we probably still have 20 to 25% underwater. Even if they wanted to sell, they can't sell. Mm-hmm. And all the numbers that are put out there are, well, we don't have near as many people underwater, but what they don't take into consideration is that you can't just be even on your mortgage because you have almost 6 to 9% in fees just to get out of it with real estate fees, and if you have to pay seller concessions. So it's not as simple as just being even. You have to be above water by probably 10%. So,
and then you have to also need to sell or want to sell.
Right, and then you have to figure out, is it going to make sense for you to sell, and where are you going to move, right? Mm-hmm. And how much are you going to have to pay to do that?
So that takes a lot of people out of the equation. It doesn't, just because they're above water doesn't mean they have to sell. They could be perfectly happy where they are, and now they're even more happy that they have positive equity, and maybe they want to stay, and maybe they even want to take a home equity loan, but they don't want to sell.
Yeah, and not just that, Louis. A lot of those people that were in the home back when interest rates dropped way down, they refinanced into an extremely low fixed rate, maybe like 3.5%. Yeah. It makes sense. It makes sense for those people not to move, right?
Why lose that?
What do they have to gain from moving out of a 3.5 to jump into a 4% somewhere else and just get a bigger house? It doesn't make sense.
Especially if they like where they're living.
Absolutely. So that's, I think, a lot of the markets. I mean, we've had this low interest rate environment for some time now, so I think people are really discounting the fact that many of the of middle-class Americans that were able to take advantage of low interest rates, they did so, and they don't really have any intentions of moving right now. So and let's just say, I'm making a number up, let's just say that's 25% of the market. Let's say another 25% of the market is still underwater even. They're still not in a position to be able to sell. It makes complete sense where we're not seeing a huge uptick in inventory coming to the market.
Which shows why you can't manipulate markets. What should have happened after they manipulated the market, they should have let it readjust. Prices would have gone down. Liquidation would have taken place. People would have lost their homes, and other people would have come in and bought them. Many of them would have been first-time home buyers because the prices would have been cheap. And then the market would have settled out. What instead they did was they doubled down on the manipulation and the interference in the market. They created the problem. They boosted the prices too high. They had a collapse, and then they tried to reflate the bubble, even though there's a huge hole in it.
Right. And
that's where we are, and it will take decades because it's not natural. The prices want to come down.
Yep.
And they can't. Yeah. They refuse to let them go down by offering incentives, reducing qualifications, keeping interest rates low. It's never going to reach its normal level.
No.
And so you're going to have low home sales, which is not good for the real estate industry. It's not good for real estate agents. It's not good for mortgage brokers. It's not good for people who want to buy houses because they're too expensive. But yet, everything is to be home prices have to go higher.
Well, and the new norm is that we just won't talk about housing anymore, right? That's the new norm. Is housing is irrelevant. I mean, it just really is. Jobs. That's where everything is now. Part-time jobs. Doesn't matter. They want those part-time jobs. They don't want to work full-time. If they want to work part-time, Ryan, and we create 800,000 part-time jobs, forget the fact that we lost 500,000 full-time jobs. It's because people, that's what they want. They want to work part-time. Yeah, housing news is now back page news, right? It's like it's buried. it's like, well, who really cares? I mean, interest rates are low. It's still a great time to buy. So, I mean, things have got to be still positive for housing, but we're just not going to talk about it.
The stock market is what the talk is about. The stock market and the labor market.
Yeah, because everybody's invested in the stock market and everybody has a job. And one of the reasons, Lewis,
I guess the people in the mainstream radio writing about it do. That's the difference between the alternative media and the mainstream media. The mainstream media people have decent jobs. There's some, the few journalistic jobs left where they probably make decent money. In the alternative media, those people probably don't make any money. They just see what they see and they report on it.
Right, and you wonder why they're so biased, right? They're looking at it from their perspective, which their
advertisers' perspective.
Right, and they can continue to push whatever agenda their advertisers want them to push, which we know what that is. One of the reasons people can't buy homes, obviously, is their credit, Lewis. I wanted to jump into a credit tip for this week. For many people that were, it may be something that's on there that's being reported erroneous. The Credit Pros have put together a nice little tip here, which can deleted items on your credit report be reinserted, meaning that you got something deleted, but then turn around and it's then re-reported by the bureaus. So there's a couple different ones. The first one is deletion based on reporting time. So if the Credit Pros they force the deletion of an item in the past 7 years from the date of last activity, then the reinsertion on the credit report is illegal. Now, in the credit industry, it's called re-aging the debt, and it's a clear violation of the law. So if something is basically from 7 years ago from the date of last activity and all of a sudden it gets re-reported, that's a violation of the law, and it cannot happen.
Why would they do that?
Oh, you know why they do it, Lewis, is to get credit scores lower, right? They do these things all the time. I mean, the whole goal is to keep people's credit scores as low as possible. So I've seen things on people's credit report that hadn't reported for years that all of a sudden show back up. And sometimes the majority of them, Lewis, are collections. You know what I mean? Where a collection might be sold to one company and then it's sold to another company and to another one, and then all of a sudden it just pops up. You know what I mean? Some other company bought it 7-8 years later, and then they're trying to re-report a debt. You know what I mean? So that occurs, but it's illegal, and they can get that permanently taken off your report just because it is a violation of the law. Second one, deletion based on not being verified in time. So the credit bureaus have an obligation to respond to the consumer disputes in a timely manner, which typically means in most cases 30 days. If it's not verified in the allotted time, the credit bureaus must remove it, as they are not permitted to basically have unverifiable information on your credit report. Now, in this case, the item can be reinserted on your credit report, but the credit bureaus must notify the consumer of the reinsertion in writing within 5 business days. Now,
when do you ever get anything from a credit bureau other than you don't get anything that tells you that stuff just appears, doesn't it?
Exactly, and we're going to jump into that on the last point because that's one of the main things that the credit pros always argue. They forget to send out anything in writing, which is a violation once again. So the last one is deletion based on incorrect data. So very often the credit bureaus and creditors report incorrect information on the credit report, and very often the credit bureaus are successful in getting those items deleted. In that instance, the credit bureaus can reinsert, but again, they must notify the consumer of reinsertion within 5 business days. Now, over 90% of the time, deleted items don't reappear. That's pretty much the standard for the credit bureaus. 90% of the time, they don't see them reinserted. Now, the bureaus are not very diligent in sending out anything to the consumer, right? So typically, they don't even give these 5-day written notices. So right there, they're in violation, which allows you to keep that item deleted off your credit report just because they didn't do it within the 5 business days. So
does it allow you to get damages?
Well, of course,
we talked about another time.
Yeah, absolutely, because guess what would happen if your credit score goes down because something's not supposed to be on your credit report and they didn't notify you in writing, right? And it's continuing to drag your score down. Now you can't buy a house or a car. That's where you see all kind of lawsuits like that against Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax because of that. And you know what? They're so big that it's hard for them to even maintain. They're shipping stuff out overseas and having computer systems look at the notices. And that's why the credit pros, they offer basically a lifetime guarantee on their deletion, because basically they're saying that, should a deleted item appear on a report at any time for any reason, the credit pros will work with you to remove the item at no cost for the life, because they're that confident that the credit bureaus are going to be in violation of something, right? I mean, for them to be that confident, that just tells you how screwed up the credit system is. And many of the times, stuff just gets thrown on the credit report. The credit bureaus really aren't verifying the information that they should be, which is why we always hear these horror stories, Louis, of people that are dealing with credit bureaus for like 2 and 3 years trying to get stuff removed, right? But that's exactly why you don't want to do it on your own. You're better off to hire, credit bureaus as an attorney-driven company so they know the letters to write, they know the buttons to push, they know the credit laws, which, to be honest, until speaking with them, I had not a clue about half these things, right? Because, I mean, to get through the federal laws and regulations and state laws and regulations for many of the way things are supposed to be reported on your credit report, I mean, it's not easy. It's not written in layman's terms for everybody to understand this stuff, and it's done like that, just like anything else, for a reason, right?
Intentionally.
They want to make it very complicated for the average individual and consumer to understand. And just know that, bad credit sometimes for the most part is a choice, because most of what's on there a lot of the time is incorrect. So I think that, if anybody's in a situation where they have items re-reporting on a credit report that shouldn't be there, definitely give the credit pros a call. I can give you the 800 number right now. It's 1-800-411-3050, or you can always just contact me directly or on the website at realestate360live.com, and I can put you in touch with them. Guys, I get nothing for recommending them. All I can tell you is that they actually do care about getting your credit straight, which, there's many companies out there that don't, but obviously for them to have a lifetime guarantee to keep items removed off the credit report, that's a good place to start.
And Ryan, there's big money to be saved, even if you don't have something major to be fixed. But if you're just getting your credit score boosted up 20, 30 points, can you talk about that, what the value of that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could be talking about the difference on a credit card. Instead of 21%, you could be getting 0% for 12 to 24 months, right? I mean, you could get, instead of maybe a 4.5 interest rate on a mortgage, maybe a 4% because your credit score was above 740. I mean, and I'm making those numbers up, but literally that's you could be talking thousands of dollars a year you could be saving yourself.
Yeah, and so, compare that to return on investment for the small fee you pay. I don't know what you pay the credit pros. Maybe you can share that with the listeners, but it seems to be a good deal.
Yeah, they typically, depends on what they're trying. If it's just like one item they need, they might just charge you a flat fee. If it's like ongoing stuff that you're going to need, because you have a lot of things to fix, they typically will charge you a monthly fee, and just depending upon, it normally isn't more than $100 a month. Okay? Which
you could be talking thousands of dollars, especially with the life of the loan.
Right, and most of the time they work for clients, it can be 4, 5, 6 months and stuff that's taken care of. So realistically, I mean, you have much more to gain than to lose by getting your credit straight, right? And that's why I always say that, bad credit is a choice, because many people, it's easy to bury your head in the sand and just not deal with it, right?
Right.
And that's why I always recommend just let somebody else deal with it so you don't have to worry about it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Because if you have to sit down and write letters to the credit bureaus and have them going to the proper place and know how many days they have to respond to you, and you worry about that stuff, you're not going to do it.
No, absolutely. You have to be quite diligent, and let's say you didn't get a return receipt on the letter, then you don't know if they got it or not, you don't have a record of it, then you realize you got to start over again. This time you're going to ask for a return receipt. No, it's a nightmare dealing with those things. And you're right, if you can outsource that to somebody who does that for a living, that's a good service.
Yep. Absolutely. So, guys, can't recommend them enough. They've helped many of my clients in the past, and I recommend it to all my clients that are dealing with stuff now. I mean, literally, we've gotten clients that didn't think they could buy a house into a house in as few as 90 days from the time that they originally looked at a bad credit report. So this isn't like you're necessarily going to have to wait 2-3 years just to be able to take advantage of low interest rate environments, whether it's buying a house, buying a car, or credit card offers. I mean,
even if you want to buy a house in 2 years, you point out all the time, it's best to start getting this stuff in shape now.
Absolutely. You want to
instead of waiting 2 years from now and finding out you got a problem.
Right. I talk to people all the time that say, hey, Ryan, I don't really plan on doing anything for about 2 years. And I was like, well, hey, here's my recommendation. Prepare as if you're buying tomorrow. Right? Because then when 2 years comes, you're already set up. You're not worried about any of this stuff. And that comes with just being proactive about the process. Don't just assume because your friends, family members, and everybody else, neighbors told you that, hey, this is all you need to do before you buy a house, that's the case. What happens if you haven't checked your credit report in over a year or two?
Right.
You don't know if something mysteriously showing up on there. And more times,
it can take a while, as you point out, to get it off.
Exactly. So don't just go at it blindly. You get a free credit report. If you go to annualcreditreport.com, you get one free report per year. I tell people all the time, go on there, get your free report. It doesn't give you the credit scores, but it gives you the report. So you can go on there and check all the items to make sure that they are being reported accurately. If they're not, call up the credit pros and get them to fix things. So it's a free credit report. And if you're not taking advantage of that, you should. So we're coming up on the end of the show here, Louis. Thank you again for coming on. Tell our listeners where they can check out your blog and get all the great insights on there.
Smallgold.com every week. We have a blog post or two on gold, silver, real estate market, the economy, Federal Reserve. So if you visit there, you'll see some good stuff. We also produce the videos. The podcast, Ryan's Real Estate 360 podcast, in the YouTube format. So you can see them in the YouTube format there on smallgold.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Louis. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you'd like to download, subscribe, and share this show on iTunes, go search Real Estate 360. Also streaming on our website at realestate360live.com. Any questions you have, reach out to us. Ask the question button on the right-hand side of the website. Until next time, take care.